Nobody clapped when Danny Calloway walked off the transport shuttle. 46 cadets from 11 different species stood in the arrival bay of Station Orin 7, and every single one of them turned to look at the human the way someone might look at a lost animal that had wandered into the wrong building. He was shorter than most of them, thinner than the Bravakians, slower looking than the Tessics. He carried one duffel bag over his shoulder and wore a training uniform that had clearly been issued in the wrong size because the Academy had not stocked human measurements in over 40 years. Commander Dasko, a scarred reptilian Sedhari with one blind eye and a voice like grinding stone, stood at the front of the formation. He held a data tablet with the intake roster. He read each name without looking up. When he reached the bottom of the list, he paused. Calloway. Human. Earth. He said it the way someone might say expired rations. He looked up for the first time. Fire Team Row 9. Last bunk hall on the left. Danny nodded and said nothing. Fire Team Row 9 was not a reward. It was where the Academy put cadets it did not expect to succeed. Danny learned this within the first hour. His teammates made it clear in their own ways. Pell was a Drevi, tall and angular with 4 arms and an exoskeleton that clicked when he was annoyed, which was always. He looked at Danny once, clicked all 4 arms against his torso, and turned away. Garo was a Bravakian, nearly 7 feet tall with thick gray skin and hands the size of dinner plates. He moved slowly and carefully, like something that knew its own weight. He nodded at Danny when they met. It was not warm, but it was not hostile. Suni was a Halani, small and gray-skinned with glowing patches along her neck that shifted color with her emotions. She studied Danny with wide dark eyes and said nothing. The patches on her neck pulsed a faint green. Danny did not know what green meant yet. Rin was a Tessic, wiry and quick with silver reflective eyes that never seemed to blink. He was the first to speak directly to Danny. He said, I heard Earth is classified as a death world. I assumed that meant your people would be more impressive. Danny set his bag on the last remaining bunk, the one beside the air recycler that hummed and rattled around the clock. Fair enough, he said. Rin stared at him for a moment, waiting for something more. Danny did not give it to him. The first day was orientation. Commander Dasko marched the full training company through the Academy's facilities. The station was enormous. Training halls the size of football fields. Simulation chambers that could recreate any planetary environment. Weapons ranges calibrated for 30 different species. Dasko stopped the company in the central hall and delivered his opening address. It was short and brutal. He told them that 60% of cadets washed out before the final evaluation. He told them that rank was earned through performance, not species reputation. Then he looked directly at Danny. The Galactic Union accepted a human cadet for the first time in 41 years. Earth has fought no interstellar wars. Earth has produced no decorated officers. Earth is classified as a Category 7 death world, which means your planet is considered more dangerous than most active combat zones. He paused. That does not make you dangerous. It makes you a survivor. Survivors react. Soldiers think. Learn the difference or go home. 200 cadets laughed. Not all of them. Not Garo. Not Suni. But enough that the sound filled the hall and bounced off the metal walls. Danny stood at attention. His face did not change. His breathing did not change. He looked straight ahead at a point on the far wall and waited for it to be over. After orientation, the fire team returned to their bunk hall. Pell claimed the best bunk without discussion. Rin took the second best. Garo settled on a 1 that creaked under his weight. Suni chose the one nearest the door. Danny sat on his bunk beside the rattling air recycler. Garo looked over at him. That unit is loud. I can swap with you if you want. No need, Danny said. He dropped his bag on the floor and stretched out on the thin mattress. I grew up next to a grain dryer on my family's farm. Ran all night during harvest season. My bedroom wall shared a wall with it for 18 years. He put his hands behind his head. This is quieter, honestly. Garo blinked his small, deep-set eyes. Across the room, Suni's neck patches shifted from green to a soft blue. Danny noticed it this time. What does blue mean? He asked her. Suni tilted her head slightly. Most species never asked. Most species did not care what Halani colors meant. Curiosity, she said. Danny nodded like that was the most normal answer in the world. Good. Curiosity is how people stop being strangers. Suni's patches stayed blue for a long time after that. Ren, lying on his bunk with his arms crossed, watched the exchange in silence. His silver eyes reflected the overhead lights. He did not say anything cruel. He did not say anything at all. The lights dimmed at 20 to 100 hours. The air recycler hummed and rattled. Somewhere on the station, 200 cadets were settling into their first night at the academy, dreaming of glory and rank and the careers that waited for them. Danny Calloway lay in the dark and listened to the recycler breathe. He was not thinking about glory. He was thinking about the names of his teammates and the layout of the corridors he had memorized during orientation and the look on Suni's face when he asked about her colors. He was thinking about how to make this work. 4 bunks away. Garo was already snoring. Pel's exoskeleton clicked softly in his sleep. Ren's breathing was too even to be genuine. The Academy had given Fire Team Row 9 its first human IT had no idea what that meant yet. The evaluation scores were posted on the barracks wall every third day. Danny had learned to walk past them without slowing down because the numbers never said what he wanted them to say. His strength rating sat in the middle of the pack. His sprint speed ranked in the bottom quarter. His marksmanship was competent but forgettable. On paper, Danny Calloway was the most average cadet in the entire training company. And in a place like the Academy, average meant invisible. The other fire teams had already started to rank themselves informally. Everyone knew that Fire Team Caro 2 was leading in combined scores. Everyone knew that Row 9 was last. Ren took this personally. He spent every free hour in the tactical simulation rooms, drilling movement patterns until his silver eyes were bloodshot. Pel trained in silence, his 4 arms moving through combat drills with mechanical precision. Garo simply endured, steady and slow and unbreakable. Danny did something none of them understood. He ran. Every morning before formation, Danny ran laps around the station's outer ring. It was a 5-kilometer loop of gray corridor with no scenery, no music, no company. He ran it once, then twice, then 3 times. The other cadets who saw him assumed he was trying to compensate for his low speed scores. They were wrong. Danny was not training to be fast. He was training to never stop. 2 weeks into the program, Commander Dasco announced the first major field exercise. It was called a long-range orienteering march. Fire teams would be dropped into a simulated jungle environment and tasked with reaching an extraction point within 6 hours. The route covered 18 kilometers of uneven terrain, dense vegetation, and simulated hostile wildlife. Row 9 was dropped at the farthest starting point from the extraction zone. Ren called it sabotage. Danny called it extra distance and started walking. The first 4 hours went poorly. Pel, whose species excelled in dry, open environments, struggled with the humidity. His exoskeleton joints stiffened in the moisture. On a steep rock face 3 hours in, his grip failed and he fell. 2 of his 4 arms hit the stone at a bad angle. The joint casings cracked. Not broken, but damaged enough that he could not use them. Ren assessed the situation in 2 seconds. Leave your gear. We redistribute weight between the 4 of us and push the pace. We can still finish in the top half if we move now. Danny was already kneeling beside Pel. He pulled cargo webbing from his own pack and began fashioning a support sling for the injured arms. We are not leaving his gear. I will carry it. That is 30 extra kilos, Ren said. You are already the slowest member of this team. Then I will be slow with 30 extra kilos. Danny tightened the sling and helped Pel to his feet. He loaded Pel's pack onto his own shoulders, stacking on top of his existing gear. He adjusted the straps until the weight sat evenly across his back. Then he started walking. He did not walk fast. He did not walk slow. He walked at a pace that never changed. By hour 5. The top fire teams had already reached the extraction point and were resting. Row 9 was still deep in the jungle. Ren was breathing hard. His species burned energy in bright, intense bursts and needed recovery time between efforts. The sustained pace was grinding him down. Garo was struggling too. Bravakians were built for power, not distance. His massive legs moved like pistons, but each step was costing him more than the last. That Suni's bioluminescent patches had faded to a dim gray. In Halani, that meant her body was shutting down non-essential functions to conserve energy. She was running on fumes. Danny was carrying 60 kilos of gear on a frame built for 30. His shoulders ached. His knees burned. Sweat had soaked through every layer of his uniform and was dripping from his chin. His boots had rubbed raw spots on both heels 2 hours ago, and he had not mentioned it. He kept walking. How? Garo asked from behind him. It was the first word anyone had spoken in over an hour. Danny glanced back. How what? How are you still moving? Danny faced forward again. On Earth, my ancestors used to chase animals across open plains for hours. Not fast, just steady. The animals would sprint ahead, stop to rest, see the humans still coming, sprint again, stop again. Eventually, the animal's body would overheat. It would collapse, and the humans would walk right up to it. He stepped over a fallen log without breaking stride. We are not built to be the fastest thing on the field. We are built to be the last thing still moving. They reached the extraction point in hour 7. Last place. Commander Dasco marked their time with visible displeasure and assigned a ranking penalty. Rin sat down on the ground and did not speak. Garo bent over with his hands on his knees, sucking air. Suni lowered herself carefully against a tree, her patches barely flickering. Danny set down the packs. Both of them. He stretched his shoulders and checked on Pel's arms. Then he sat down quietly and drank water. That night in the barracks, something small happened. Pel walked to Danny's bunk and set a ration pack on it without a word. It was his own ration pack, the good kind with a dreamy spice blend that Pel never shared. He clicked his 2 working arms once and returned to his own bunk. Garo nodded at Danny from across the room. Suni's patches glowed amber, warm and steady. Rin lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He did not make a joke about humans that night. He did not make a joke about anything. High above the barracks, in the Academy's observation tower, General Morrow sat in a dark room reviewing footage. His aide pointed to Roan 9's last place finish. Morrow waved it away. He rewound the video to a moment near hour 6. Danny was adjusting Pel's sling while walking, reading the terrain map on his wrist display, and scanning the trillion ahead. 3 tasks, 0 pause. Morrow leaned back in his chair. Interesting, he said to no one. The simulation chamber smelled like burnt ozone and recycled air. Fire Team Row 9 stood in a ready line behind the entry hatch while a technician ran final calibrations on the scenario they were about to enter. It was their 4th combat simulation in 2 days, and the first 3 had gone well enough. Middle of the pack. Nothing special, nothing embarrassing. Danny had been fine with that. Ren had not. We are 6 points behind Caro, too, Ren said, checking the leaderboard on his wrist display for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. If we clear this scenario fast and clean, we move up. What is the scenario? Garo asked. The technician answered without looking up. The collapse. Failing orbital station. Hostile forces on 2 approach vectors. Atmosphere venting. Gravity unstable. Objective is to reach the evacuation shuttle before structural failure. Ren's silver eyes lit up. This was his kind of exercise. Speed, precision, tactical routing. I will call the movements. Garo on point. Pel high. Suni on comms. Done. Fidigaps. Danny nodded. Fidigaps. That was his role now, the one who went where he was needed without being asked. He had stopped minding it weeks ago. Being useful mattered more than being featured. The hatch opened. The simulation hit them immediately. Red emergency lighting. The floor tilted 3 degrees to the left and kept shifting. Alarms screamed from speakers embedded in the walls. The air was thin, getting thinner. Somewhere ahead, simulated weapons fire echoed through a collapsing corridor. Ren moved fast. He called routes, timed their sprints between cover points, and kept the team tight. Garo absorbed fire at the front. Pel climbed to elevated positions and laid down suppressive shots with all 4 arms. Suni monitored atmospheric data and flagged safe corridors. Danny filled gaps. He carried extra ammunition. He watched angles no one else was covering. He moved quietly and efficiently, always a step behind whoever needed him most. They were ahead of the clock. Ren was pushing them hard, and it was working. The evacuation shuttle was 2 corridors away. Then Danny saw them. Behind a sealed bulkhead to their left, visible through a narrow observation window, a group of civilian holograms huddled in a darkening room. 7 figures, some of them small, child-sized. The atmospheric breach was advancing toward their section. In minutes, maybe less, the air in that room would be gone. The bulkhead was sealed. The civilians were not part of the mission objective. The tactical answer, the one the Academy had designed this scenario to teach, was to walk past them. Reach the shuttle. Complete the mission. Score the points. Ren saw them too. He did not slow down. Bypass. They are not real, and they are not the objective. Shuttle is 90 seconds ahead. Danny stopped walking. Everyone else stopped too, because when the person filling your gaps suddenly was not there anymore, you felt it. Danny, Ren said. His voice was sharp. Move. There are kids in there, Danny said. They are holograms. I know. Danny was already moving toward the bulkhead. But someday they will not be. What happened next took 3 minutes. Danny rerouted power from his own suit's heating system to the bulkhead's manual release. His suit temperature dropped immediately. The cold hit him like a wall. His fingers went stiff. His breath came out in white clouds inside his helmet. He forced the bulkhead open. The civilian holograms stumbled out, confused and frightened in the way that well-programmed simulations could mimic. Danny directed them down a secondary corridor he had noticed on the station schematic during the briefing, a route no one else had memorized because it led away from the primary objective. Then he sealed the breach behind them using an emergency foam canister he had picked up in the first room of the simulation. He had pocketed it without thinking, the way a person from a dangerous world pocketed anything that might be useful later. That'd be why the time he finished, the evacuation window had closed. The shuttle was gone. The simulation ended with a flat tone and the words "Mission failed" projected on every wall. Ren did not speak to Danny for the rest of the day. Commander Dasco did. He called Danny to the front of the full training company during the evening debrief and dressed him down for 6 straight minutes. Tactical insubordination. Emotional compromise. Mission failure due to individual deviation from team directive. Dasco is blind. I seem to stare harder than his good one. Danny stood at attention and absorbed every word the way he absorbed everything. Quietly, completely, without flinching. That night, the mess hall was loud with conversation from other fire teams celebrating their simulation scores. Row 9 sat at their usual table in the corner. The mood was heavy. Ren ate in silence, his jaw tight. Pell clicked his arms in a slow, irritated rhythm. Garo pushed food around his tray. Danny sat at the end of the table with an empty tray, not hungry. Then Suni sat down beside him. She had never done that before. She always sat across from Garo, where there was space. This time she chose the spot next to Danny, close enough that her shoulder nearly touched his. Her neck patches pulsed a deep, warm amber. Danny had learned enough Halani color language by now to know what amber meant. Respect. My people have a saying, Suni said quietly. The mission is what you carry out. The purpose is what you carry home. Danny looked at her. He did not smile, but something in his expression softened. That is a good saying. It is why I joined, she said. Across the table, Ren was listening. His silver eyes reflected the overhead lights. He said nothing. But when Suni sat down next to Danny, Ren did not move to a different table. He stayed. And somewhere above them, General Moreau watched Danny's suit data from the simulation. Core temperature had dropped to 4 degrees during the bulkhead sequence. At that temperature, most species in the Union lost motor function entirely. Danny's hands have been shaking on the footage. But his grip never failed. Not once. Moreau opened Danny's homeworld file and read one line. Dominant species classification, endurance persistence predator, omnivore, social pack bonder. He closed the file and opened a different one. The final evaluation. Week 6. He began making changes. Copy Suni was the first person in Fire Team Row 9 to say it out loud. She said it on the 5th week, in the middle of a rest period between drills, while the team sat on the floor of the training eating ration bars. He scares me a little, she said. Garo looked up. Who? Suni's neck patches flickered a pale violet, the Halani shade for unease. She tilted her head toward Danny, who was on the far side of the bay doing pull-ups on a cargo rail. He had been doing them for 20 minutes. His arms were shaking. He had not stopped. Not in a dangerous way, Suni continued. In a way I do not have a word for. My species feels emotions from others. Surface emotions, the obvious ones. Fear, anger, joy. With Danny, I feel all of them at the same time, and none of them slow him down. Pell clicked one of his healed arms thoughtfully. The Academy psychologist evaluated him this week. I heard the report was flagged. Flag how? Garo asked. Unusual. Not concerning. Unusual. Pell watched Danny finish another pull-up. Apparently, when humans experience fear, they do not suppress it. They use it, like fuel. Ren, who had been silent through this conversation, spoke without looking up from the tactical manual on his lap. Every species uses fear. That is basic survival biology. Not like this, Suni said. Most species feel fear and then choose to act despite it. That takes time, a decision point, a moment of override. She paused. Danny does not have that gap. He feels the fear and he is already moving. The decision and the fear happen at the same time. There is no pause. Ren turned a page in his manual and said nothing. The truth was that Ren had been watching Danny more carefully than any of them, and he liked less and less of what he saw. Not because Danny was bad, because Danny was wrong. Wrong by every metric Ren's species valued. On Tessic, the greatest warriors were those who never got hit. Speed, evasion, precision. Clean victories. Danny's approach was the opposite. He absorbed damage. He traded pain for position. He let himself get hurt if it meant someone else did not. That was not tactics. That was something Ren did not have a framework for. And yet, during the team strategy drills that week, Danny had started contributing in ways Ren could not ignore. Small things. He noticed patterns in the simulated enemy behavior before the second cycle. He positioned team members based on their fatigue levels, not their skill ratings, which meant no one burned out at critical moments. He remembered every corridor, every junction, every supply cache from every exercise they had ever run. Ren was the tactical mind of Row 9. He knew that. Everyone knew that. But Danny was becoming something else. Something that did not have a rank or a title. He was becoming the reason the tactics worked, because he made sure the people executing them were in the right place at the right time, with enough left in them to do the job. It was infuriating. It was also effective. On Thursday evening of Week 5, Ren and Danny finally collided. The team was planning their approach for the upcoming final evaluation. Ren laid out an aggressive strategy. Fast insertion, rapid objective capture, maximum score potential. It was brilliant. It was clean. It was exactly what the Academy rewarded. Danny studied the map and said, "What if the scenario changes halfway through? Then we adapt. Your plan has one speed. Fast. If something breaks, there is no fallback." Ren's silver eyes locked onto Danny. "My plan has one speed because one speed is all we need if we execute properly. Your problem is that you always plan for failure." "I plan for reality," Danny said. "Reality does not care about execution." The argument built slowly, like pressure in a sealed room. Ren's voice got sharper. Danny stayed level, which made Ren angrier. Garo shifted uncomfortably. Pell's arms clicked in a rapid pattern that meant he wanted to leave. Suni's patches cycled through 3 colors in 10 seconds. Then the alarm went off, not a drill alarm, not a simulation tone, a real alarm. The deep, bone-shaking pulse that meant something on Station Orin 7 had gone wrong. The emergency channel crackled. A micrometeorite had struck the outer hull in the residential quarter. Small breach, but a compartment seal had malfunctioned. 3 cadets from Fireteam Den were trapped in a room that was losing atmosphere. Danny was out the door before the alarm finished its second pulse. Ren watched him go. Then he grabbed his gear and followed. So did Garo, Pell, and Suni. No one discussed it. No one planned. They simply moved because Danny moved, and somewhere in the last 5 weeks, That had become enough. They ran through corridors filled with confused cadets and flashing emergency lights. Danny was ahead, moving with a certainty that made no sense until soon he realized he had memorized the station layout down to the maintenance corridors. He was not guessing. He was navigating. They reached the compromise section in 4 minutes. Through the observation panel, Danny could see the 3 trapped cadets, 2 Drevi and 1 Bravakian. They were conscious but pale. The air was visibly thinning, a slight haze forming as pressure dropped. The emergency seal needed to be engaged manually from the outside. A heavy mechanical crank built into the wall as a failsafe for exactly this kind of malfunction. But the crank was in the decompression zone. The corridor on this side of the seal was already losing air. Danny checked the gauge on his wrist. His suit had 90 seconds of breathable air in its emergency reserve. He already knew, from the maintenance specs he had read out of habit during his first week, that the manual seal took 2 minutes to fully close 0.90 seconds of air. 2 minutes of work that he looked at the 3 faces on the other side of the glass. Then he grabbed the crank and started turning. Ren stood behind him, and for the first time since they met, he had nothing to say. The crank did not want to move. It had not been turned manually in over a decade, and the mechanism was stiff with age and vacuum exposure. Danny braced his boots against the deck plating, wrapped both hands around the lever, and pulled. Metal groaned. The seal inched forward. Behind Danny, the corridor air was thinning fast. His suit's emergency reserve kicked in at the 60-second mark, feeding him recycled oxygen through a thin tube near his chin. 90 seconds of air. The clock in his head started counting. He turned the crank again and again. Each rotation moved the seal a few centimeters. Through the observation panel, the 3 trapped cadets watched with wide eyes. One of the Drevi was pressing both hands against the glass. The Bravakian had sat down against the far wall, conserving energy the way his species did when oxygen dropped that Danny's arms burned. The cold hit next, creeping through his suit as the corridor temperature plunged. His gloves stiffened. His fingers felt thick and slow. He adjusted his grip and kept turning. Ren stood 3 meters behind him in the last pocket of stable atmosphere. He could not reach Danny without entering the decompression zone himself. Tessic lungs were smaller than human lungs. He would be unconscious in 30 seconds. "Danny," Ren said. His voice came through the suit calm, thin and tight. "Your air." "I know," Danny said. He kept turning to the 90-second mark. His reserve ran dry. The tube near his chin hissed once and went silent. Danny had known this was coming. His suit had been low since a training exercise that morning, a detail he had not reported to maintenance because he had not wanted to miss evening drills. Now, there was no air. There was only the crank and the seal, and the distance between closed and not closed. His vision narrowed. Not slowly, like falling asleep, but sharply like someone was drawing curtains from the edges inward. His body screamed at him. Every cell, every nerve, every ancient survival instinct built into human DNA over 2 million years of evolution told him the same thing. "Stop. Let go. Breathe." He did not stop. He turned the crank with hands that had gone white. His chest heaved against nothing. His jaw was clenched so hard that his teeth ached. The seal moved, centimeter by centimeter, grinding and slow and terrible. 44 seconds without air. On Earth, the human body can remain conscious without oxygen for roughly 60 to 90 seconds, depending on the individual. Athletes and divers sometimes push past that. People in extreme survival situations, the kind where someone else's life depends on what they do next, have been documented pushing further still. Danny Calloway was a farm kid from Montana who ran every morning and never once stopped when his body told him to. 2 minutes and 14 seconds, the seal locked into place. A solid clunk that rang through the corridor like a bell. The 3 cadets on the other side were safe. The compartment held. Danny let go of the crank. He stood for a moment, swaying, his hands hanging at his sides. His vision was a narrow tunnel of gray light. Then he turned and walked, not ran, to the nearest oxygen station 11 meters down the corridor. He pulled the emergency mask off the wall, pressed it to his face, and breathed that he did not collapse. He did not fall. He stood there and breathed until the gray tunnel opened back up into the world. Rin had not moved from his position. His silver eyes were wide. He had watched the entire thing, and he still did not fully understand what he had just seen. The medical team arrived 6 minutes later. They checked Danny's vitals and found moderate hypoxic stress across his extremities, bruising on both palms, and a blood oxygen reading of 27% at the time the seal had closed. The attending physician, a Halani specialist, stared at the number for a long time before entering it into the record. Most galactic species lost consciousness below 40%. Below 30, organs began shutting down. Danny had been at 27, and he was standing upright and walking. They kept him in medical for 6 hours. He was discharged with instructions to rest for a full-day cycle. He reported to morning formation the next day. Commander Dasco saw him in line and paused. For 1/4 of a second, his reptilian eyes rested on Danny. Then he moved on without a word. The story spread through the academy within hours. The human who sealed a bulkhead on no air. The cadets who had been saved, 2 Drevi and a Bravakian named Fell, sought Danny out in the mess hall to thank him. Danny shook their hands and asked about their recovery. When they tried to call him brave, he changed the subject to the food. Soon he found him later that evening on the observation deck. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the window, staring at the opposite wall. His hands were bandaged where the crank had torn the skin through his gloves. She sat down beside him without asking. Her neck patches glowed a deep amber that was almost gold. "Were you afraid?" she asked. "The whole time," Danny said. "But you did not stop." He looked at his bandaged hands. "Where I come from, the people who stop are the ones you bury." Suni did not answer. She leaned her shoulder against his, lightly, in the Halani gesture of solidarity. Danny did not pull away 0.3 floors above them. General Moreau sat in his office and watched the corridor footage for the 7th time. He paused it at the moment Danny's air ran out. He watched the human's face. Fear, pain, and then something else. Something that happened at the 30-second mark, a shift. Not calm, not acceptance. Something more primitive. A look that said the body had voted to quit and the mind had overruled it by force. Moreau had seen that look once before. On a Bravakian soldier who held a collapsing tunnel for 4 minutes, so her unit could escape. She received the Union's highest honor. Posthumously, Danny walked to an oxygen station. Moreau picked up his comm and called Union High Command that he had changes to make to the final evaluation. Row 9 drew Sector 7 for the final evaluation. It was the worst assignment on the board, a low-priority defensive position on the outer edge of the simulated colony, far from the action, far from the scoring zones, far from anything that mattered. Rin stared at the assignment screen like it owed him money. They gave us the graveyard. Pell clicked all 4 arms in disgust. Garo exhaled slowly. Suni looked at Danny. Danny studied the full tactical map displayed on the briefing wall. Every sector, every defensive line, every supply route, every building in the simulated colony. He studied it the way he studied everything. Quietly, completely, and with the kind of focus that made Suni's neck patches go blue. Then he said, "Good. No one will be watching us." The exercise was called Operation Last Light. Every fire team in the academy participated simultaneously. It was the largest, most complex scenario in the training cycle. Performance determined final rankings, career placements, and commendations. For most cadets, this was the single most important day of their military education. For 2 hours, it went exactly as planned. Row 9 held Sector 7 without difficulty. Danny had arranged them in a staggered formation he had adapted from something he read about old cavalry tactics from Earth. Overlapping fields of fire, minimal exposure, maximum flexibility. It was not in any academy manual, but it worked. Then the world broke to the 2-hour mark. The colony's defense grid failed. Not partially, completely. Sectors began collapsing in sequence like dominoes. Communication lines went dead. The central command post was overrun. Within 30 minutes, every structure the cadets had been trained to rely on was gone, and no orders. No objectives. No extraction plan, just chaos, darkness, and 200 cadets scattered across a simulated war zone with no idea what to do next. Danny knew what to do. He gathered row 9 in the shelter of a collapsed wall and spoke calmly. This is not about winning anymore. The exercise just changed. Now, it is about collecting people. No one argued. Not even Ren. Danny reorganized the team. Garo took point, his massive frame absorbing anything that came at them from the front. Pell moved to high ground, using his 4 arms to fire from elevated positions while scanning the terrain. Suni activated her bioluminescence to maximum output, sending pulsing signals across light frequencies that most species could not see, but that registered on standard helmet displays as a rescue beacon. And Ren fell in beside Danny and started doing what he did best. He calculated routes between the fallen sectors, found paths through the wreckage, identified choke points and safe corridors with the tactical brilliance that had defined him since day one. But for the first time, he was not using it to win. He was using it to find people. They moved through the battlefield for 4 hours. Not fast, steady. Danny's pace. The pace that never changed, that never stopped, that wore the world down instead of trying to outrun it. They found scattered cadets huddled behind broken barricades. A Tessic pair who had lost their fire team leader. A lone Bravakian sitting in a dark room with her weapon across her knees, waiting for orders that would never come. A group of 5 from 3 different species who had banded together but had no plan and no direction. Danny collected them all. He spoke to each one in the same low, steady voice. He told them where to go. He gave them roles. He shared his rations. When a wounded Sethari cadet could not walk, Danny put the cadet on his back and carried him for 2 kilometers without slowing down. By the time they reached the emergency shelter, a building Danny had identified on the colony map during the initial briefing and filed away as a contingency that no one else had thought to plan for. He had 23 cadets behind him from 9 different species that he organized a perimeter. He assigned watch shifts. He set up a triage area using supplies he had scavenged during the movement. He did all of this without raising his voice, without hesitation, without asking for authority. The authority was simply there. It had been built over 6 weeks of carrying other people's gear and sealing bulkheads on empty lungs, and never once stopping when his body told him to. In the observation room above the simulation floor, General Moreau stood surrounded by senior officers and academy instructors. Dozens of screens showed fire teams across the battlefield. Most were frozen in defensive positions, waiting for a command structure that no longer existed. One screen showed Sector 7. Showed a human from a farming town in Montana standing in the center of an emergency shelter, turning 23 frightened cadets into a functioning unit. Commander Dasco stood beside Moreau. He had not spoken in 20 minutes. His scarred reptilian face was unreadable. Moreau rewound the footage to the moment the defense grid collapsed. He watched Danny's face. There was a flicker, half a second. Fear, calculation, acceptance, action. For stages in less than a heartbeat. Then the human moved. The room was silent. Moreau turned to the assembled officers. That, he said, pointing at the screen, is what Earth sends us. Not the fastest, not the strongest, not the most brilliant, but the one who moves when everyone else has stopped. He paused. Promote him. 1 week later, Danny stood in the Academy's main hall in a dress uniform that did not fit right. He was awarded the rank of squad leader, the first human to hold that rank in the Academy's history. After the ceremony, Ren found him alone on the observation deck, looking at the stars. Ren stood beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Ren said, "On Tessic, we have a word for someone who wins without fighting. We call them Kasol. It means the one who is already there." He paused. "I did not understand it before. I think it means you." Danny smiled. A small, tired, honest thing. He looked back at the stars. Behind them, footsteps. Suni, Garo, and Pell appeared in the doorway. No one spoke. The 5 of them stood together in the dark, watching the stars turn slowly beyond the glass. Fire Team Row 9. Dead last on every scoreboard. First in everything that mattered. A unit.